those who are with us, let us know in the comments, what LLMs are you using? Mason, what's your go-to AI platform? I'm currently a chat lover, but I'm learning to appreciate Claude.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm proud of this, but when chat did its like essentially Spotify Wrapped, but for chat, it
Oh
was
yeah.
like you're a top 1% chat user. And I was like, wow, that's depressing. I should probably get some more friends. So I've been deep into chat until about a week and a half or 2 weeks ago,
Same.
where I finally went all in on Claude, and I legitimately have put 100 hours into Claude
Oh wow.
in the past two. Like I haven't done anything else. Um, so it's been very cool
Yeah.
and very beneficial. So
Yeah.
I'm converted.
Yeah.
At least until the next model updates and everything's now better,
Right.
and then
Yeah. No,
probably Gemini is next.
Claude is awesome, especially with the design capabilities they have out of there. Because I've been testing it with Gemini and ChatGPT, so it's pretty cool to compare them all.
Yeah. I This is gonna be so nerdy. I think we have quite a few agency owners. So I'm an agency owner,
Mm.
and our team is like, Mason, what do you think about this thing? And I'm like, that's a great question. But I
Yeah,
get
I'm
the
so
same
glad you
questions from
asked.
our team. Uh, and so what we've been doing is I have been having co-work interview me as it relates to specific topics so we can then turn those into standardized
Wow.
operating processes. And we've actually
Yeah.
developed 100 in the past 2 weeks of like actual standardized playbooks that our teams can go and run. So we're slowly rolling those out to team members so they can test them and make sure that they all work and make sense. But it's been hugely beneficial for me to get thoughts on paper.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's a pretty cool idea.
All right.
Cool. We let's get started. We're 2 minutes in, folks are joining. Cool. Well, thank you all for joining us. My name is Danielle Wood. I'm with CallRail. I lead content and design. I'm based in Charleston, South Carolina, and I'm excited to be joined by Mason Cosby of Scrappy ABM. Mason, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, I help build ABM programs, and I run an agency. So today I'm speaking at it from a how we helped our clients, but also how we're doing it for our own business because we're starting to show up in AI results, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
So anyway, excited to be here.
Awesome. Thank you. Simone, if we can go to the next slide, please. Awesome, cool. So just before we get started, quick overview of CallRail for anyone who's new and joining us. CallRail is a lead engagement platform. Our goal is to make it really easy for you to be able to connect the dots between your campaigns, your conversations, your customers. And Mason, if you could tell us about Scrappy ABM.
Yeah, we build repeatable account-based marketing programs to connect marketing sales and customer success so you can go get more of your best customers. So if you have a subset of your customers, you're like, man, I wish I could copy and paste those. We do that.
Love it. Awesome. So we are here today to really talk about, these trends we're seeing in AI and the role that it's playing in how consumers are discovering businesses and the fact that we're seeing it's already influencing real calls and leads. So we are going to break down, what we're seeing in this buyer behavior. We're seeing it through real data, so we'll break that down and how each AI platform is contributing, and then practical ways for you to leverage this AI for your business. So let's go ahead and start with what's actually changing in consumer behavior. So buyers are far more educated now than ever, and it's really thanks to AI. So Mason, let's get into what you're seeing when it comes to the consumer behavior and the buyer's
Yeah, so
journey.
I think a lot about the buyer's journey. So kind of the old buyer would go and do a bunch of research on their own, and that typically looked like going to competitors' websites, review websites. Maybe they go to your website, they talk to their peers, they talk to coworkers, and then eventually they may talk to your sellers. And then all of that filtered into their brain, and then they thought a lot about it, and again had some internal conversations. There were lots of discussions, and then all of that turned into a decision. So again, this is what most people have historically done. As we think about now, the new way that buyers are actually engaging, it looks slightly different. So what now is often happening is first people are going to their LLM of choice and saying, "Hey, I'm thinking about buying this thing." And some people are like, the way that I have prompted it, and I'm seeing other people prompt it, is they literally say, run me through a diagnostic approach to identify the best solution for me. So they're actually prompting AI to be an advisor. And then what they're doing is, based on that advising, they then go to competitor websites that are surfaced up by AI. They go to review websites. They go maybe to your website if you're actually surfaced up. They still talk to their peers, because as much as we like AI as a starting point, we still want social validation for people that we know and trust. We talk to our coworkers, and then if they end up booking the meeting, schedule a call and talk to your sellers. Additionally, many people are going back to that same thread they started, and they're then uploading all the information, all the context that they're getting to create this digital advisor that's purpose built for this purchase decision for their organization. And then they take everything that their digital advisor gives back to them. They still think about it. I want to be super clear. People are not like blindly just trusting AI and making these purchases, but they do have a far greater capability to get detailed researched information that is nuanced based on everything that all of the providers are sending their way. And then they make their decision. So we now have, essentially, as the entry point for many purchases today, LLMs. And even if they're not the entry point, they're still a huge factor in actually making the decision for which vendor a customer will move forward with.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And great segue into, we had a lot of curiosity into how LLM was playing in that exact buyer's journey that Mason was just walking through. So this is what we're seeing on the other side. So this is how the market is responding. AI visibility is quickly becoming a priority for marketers. Budgets are shifting. 94% of marketing leaders say that they're planning to increase their investment AEO. 97% say that they're already focused on measuring that visibility. So the market is moving, but yet only 5% actually say that they can translate that into revenue impact. So there's a pretty clear gap between that visibility and conversions. And that's exactly why we wanted to dig into this analysis. How can you show up in AI? And then how can you find out if it's actually driving new customers? So let's go ahead and look at what we're seeing in our data. So we analyzed over 20 million leads to really understand how AI search is influencing conversions. And we're seeing a really clear trend. In our initial data pool across all industries, about 0.073% of leads were coming from AI search. But when we looked again just a few months ago, back in March, that number grew about 30%, so about 0.095%. So, at a first glance, you're probably like, that is such a small number. But at this scale, it's actually representing, millions of additional leads being directed by these AI platforms. So the takeaway here is that rate of change, it's accelerating very quickly. And, it's no longer just a future channel, it's a current reality. So, we're not just talking about a new tool, but like a shift in behavior. And expectations are, changing too. People don't want a list of links anymore. They want that clear answer, the recommendation. So that's where AI is really making this different. It's deciding what to surface instead of just ranking a list of options. And we're seeing this expand across platforms and industries. So if we go to the next slide, we break this down by industry. So this is where we can see it showing up most clearly. In our initial data pool, the top 3 industries of influence leads were legal, manufacturing, agency. So think more of these high trust, high consideration industries. But in our recent update, legal is still coming in at the top. So definitely makes sense if you think about those high intent searches. If someone's looking for that legal help, they usually need a recommendation pretty fast. It's not something that they're just casually researching. But the biggest movement that we're noticing is these newer industries. So travel and retail definitely jumped into those top ranks. Travel growing over 100% in 4 months. Agencies are still strong too. They're continuing to grow as this mix is shifting. And what this is really telling us is that it's not sticking to these high consideration industries anymore. It's really expanding into these everyday, day-to-day decisions. So if we look at this from a platform perspective, ChatGPT is still driving the majority of these AI influence leads, but that dominance is actually really starting to shift. We saw it dip slightly from about 90 to 89%. Claude saw the biggest movement. It increased by almost 300%, which is crazy. At the same time, Perplexity, Gemini, dropped more significantly. So it's pretty clear that AI discovery is starting to become more distributed. It's not just one platform that's driving most of these leads. So, definitely each platform is starting to play its own role, kind of based on the decision being made. So if we think about, ChatGPT, so it's driving a larger share of leads in industries like real estate, healthcare. Think about speed and immediacy really matter here. Perplexity, Claude, it's showing up in industries like business services, manufacturing. I think these decisions tend to be more research driven. So you're evaluating these vendors, you're comparing these options. So each platform is really starting to play a different role depending on that decision. And that's really the important shift here, is that it's not just about showing up in AI broadly. You really want to make sure that you're showing up where your customers are searching. So Mason, let's go ahead and break down Claude. This was a
Yeah.
big one.
So the other thing I would want to just, I guess, give context on specifically, we're going to dig into Claude because most of the people that we're anticipating being here are B2B in nature. So Claude is really a purpose-built tool for businesses. If you look at ChatGPT and you actually look back at where those searches were most often happening, it was in real estate, it was in travel, and it was in healthcare, which are often more B2C in nature. So Chat is really still has kind of the chokehold on the consumer market. So if you're trying to aim for consumers, great. Claude, on the other hand, is having massive growth because it was so focused on specifically businesses. So one of my favorite things is to watch these YouTube videos that outline like what's the best tool. And one guy eventually, when he was outlining like Claude versus everything, he's like, well, Claude beats everything because with Claude code, you could build all the other ones. And that's because, again, Anthropic built for business. Additionally, I think a huge reason is Anthropic is like crazy big. Like they have a $380 billion valuation in 5 years. So again, as a business owner, I'm like, well, they're probably doing a couple of things right. So I'm not going to try to beat Anthropic by any stretch of the imagination. I'm not smart enough to do that, but I do want to take some lessons and steal from some of their notes. Additionally, and I'm not aiming to make this political, I'm just calling out something that did happen. Quite a few people saw how Anthropic handled the situation with the Department of War and had a very positive sentiment about Anthropic's stance on that. So Anthropic has been in the news in a very big way and has had a positive sentiment from a lot of people. So again, not aiming for that to be political, just calling out that did happen. And then lastly, because unlike other LLMs, I think Codex has recently come out for chat, but Cowork has been around for a while, and Cowork really feels like, for quick context, in the suite of Claude tools, there's Claude Chat, Claude Cowork, and Claude Code. Chat is very similar to what you would expect, where it's more kind of answer and response. Cowork, on the other hand, feels more like an intern, where like I give it lots of things to do, and it actually goes and runs tasks for me and accomplishes things on my to-do list, which is really beneficial when you're trying to make business decisions, because you can then give it all the information and say, can you analyze these and give me a pros and cons list and make a recommendation of which vendor you would recommend going forward with. So it's very action oriented towards decision making, and people are becoming more and more comfortable with that. So that's why we think we're seeing a lot of momentum grow with Claude specifically. As we then think about, okay, what does this mean for all of you? The big thing to directly address moving forward is like the AI shift is not going anywhere. So this all perfectly connects to our next thought around, again, more buyers are going to be using AI for decision making. And this is another framing that I heard recently that I was just like, oh, that's so good. Because I think as I've spoken to some people, they're still hesitant to adopt or to utilize or to really go all in. And the framing that I heard is today is the worst AI will be. It only gets better. So if it's already this good today, it will only continue to get better over time. So the sooner you learn to adopt and learn to actually use these tools to your advantage, the more you will benefit from it. So I want to just call that out, and we're going to walk through right now how to actually have AI on your side. Now, the next 4 slides are like ridiculously tactical by design. So I hope that you actually take some things and go do them. Actually, right now, if I'm in your shoes on a separate tab, I'd go pull up your LLM of choice. The other thing that I meant to mention at the beginning, forgive me, you joined today because you probably have questions. So if you have questions, please drop those in the comments, and we're going to try to answer those before the end of this time. If we don't get to them, Danielle and I know Danielle's really nice. I think I'm a decently nice person. Um, if you send us questions over LinkedIn, we'll get back to you and answer your questions. So that said, if we go to the next slide, this is probably the most beneficial thing I can give you today, which is just learning how to effectively prompt an AI tool. I learned this framework relatively in the past 4 months, and it's just the crit framework. So that's context. So context is here's everything that's happening. Role is who do you want this AI to actually act like? Um, AI in and of itself can pull from the entirety of the internet. And if you don't give it a role, it doesn't know how to decipher the entirety of the internet and what is a signal versus what is noise. So if you tell it to be a CFO, it's going to better identify the signals that it should pull from this giant language model that's pulling from versus the noise that's actually not relevant. Next, which is the most beneficial thing that I found, is telling AI to ask you questions. Because more often than not, we prompt it, we say, hey, here's a question, and then it just gives us an answer. And it's not really what we're actually looking for. So I just would rather have AI or my LLM of choice ask me some additional follow-up questions to make sure it's got everything before it gives me an answer. And then lastly is task, which is define the outcome you actually want. So is this an analysis? Is it a set of recommendations? Like, what are you actually asking for? And if you prompt AI in this way, you will actually end up getting far better responses and get things that are actually actionable. So moving on to the next slide, the big thing that we are aiming to give you before the end of today is actually a prompt. So we'll drop this to you afterwards, but you can literally copy and paste. I actually built out a little guide that helps you identify the ways that you can see how AI sees your business. So there's 3 things we're about to walk you through on how to audit your business. The first one is literally asking AI about your business and what it knows about your business. Because if people prompt, so I'll just talk about me for just a second. I run an ABM agency. So if somebody goes into Claude or in Gemini or chat and says, what's the best agency that helps companies? And then they insert the information on their companies. If it's a $20 to $200 million B2B SaaS company that's based in the US that has 3 to 8 marketers, I'd like to show up because that's who I help. So if I put in that information and I don't show up, that's a problem and we should solve for that. So again, truly the first thing is just identifying, do you show up? So again, you'll get this afterwards, but if I'm in your shoes, go into Claude or chat or Perplexity, type out the exact problem your best customers had before they hired you. And then try to see who it actually brings up, how it describes them, and where you fall in that list, slash if you fall in that list. Because if you don't, that means that you're not actually showing up in that current subset. And on the 20 million that CallRail analyzed, that's still 19,000 leads. So I'm going to call that out as that's today, and it's only going to get better. So anyway, that's step 1. Again, we will send this out to you afterwards, or if you want it right now, just shoot me a LinkedIn DM and I'll share the full document with you. If we go on to the next slide, again, this is just, are we getting discovered? I think this is probably the most beneficial thing for AI as we look at the sales process. So I have a great sales deck that I really enjoy. I've passed it off to our sales team and they now do our sales. But a lot of our selling process is actually done in the conversation. And what helped me is I actually uploaded our sales deck to chat at the time and now Claude and said, help me understand why X person, and I gave our exact ICP, wouldn't buy. And I realized how much we were leaning on being able to talk through information. Well, fun fact, if someone wasn't on the call, they didn't get that information. All they got was the sales deck. And then additionally, chat and Gemini and all these tools can only read what is uploaded in written format. So unless your buyer is also then uploading the call transcript, which some of them may, some of them may not, AI is not evaluating you based on the entirety of the sales process. So what I like to do is then in the crit framework, have it be your champion buyer at a target account. So you tell it, you're the CMO at CallRail. Let's say I was trying to sell CallRail, but you're the CMO at CallRail. I need you to analyze this deck based on what I've sent. And then if you have case studies, you also send along, share those case studies. And then lastly, here's an important one that's a little tedious, but it's helpful. Copy and paste every email over as well. Buyers are more likely to copy and paste over emails than they are transcripts because those are easier to find. So if you upload all of that and then ask, using only these materials, could you sell me internally to your CEO and CFO? And then let it actually tell you the gaps. And then upload the transcripts after that and say, is there anything in these transcripts that was not captured in my emails and in my sales proposal or my sales presentation? And it will then literally tell you how you're overcoming the gap in your sales collateral, which is currently costing you deals. Because again, what I'm seeing many buyers do is they upload all the information into a shared thread, and then they share that thread internally to ask it questions. It becomes the knowledge base for this sale. And there's lots of knowledge in the call that never made it into the knowledge base. So you can overcome that by actually putting it in written format in your follow-up emails. So highly recommend this. Again, we have a whole crit framework for how to actually do this exact prompting. If you'd like that, feel free to shoot me a DM on LinkedIn. All right, last one. This one's also this is actually my favorite one. So many people sell with a sales presentation. And then if you're a software company, you have a demo process. But then after all of that, you finally have the contract. And fun fact, a lot of the final sign-off people don't look at the sales deck. They were not in any of the calls. They just get a contract that hits their desk and they're told, hey, are we good to sign? And that is the only context they get. And often it's the CFO whose job it is to protect the business from taking unnecessary risk. So what they often do is they download contract, upload to LLM, and ask a basic question of, where am I exposed? Why wouldn't I want to sign this? What are the things that I and our team are not thinking about that would hurt our business? And then the answers they get actually determine the level of pushback you're going to get on whether or not you actually get to work with them. So how do I like to address this? Download contract up, because most everyone has a standard set of terms and a standard set of deliverables that they're doing. So tell your LLM of choice that you're the CFO at the buying company and that they specifically have no additional context other than this contract. Then upload your MSA and your SOW, MSA being Master Services Agreement and the SOW being the Statement of Work, and ask, where am I exposed if I sign this? And what should I push back on before sign off? And then it will literally tell you what you're going to get pushback on. The number one thing for most agencies, as a side note, is vague deliverables. So again, as agencies, if you sell retainers, the vague deliverable approach has been so you have flexibility within the context of the engagement to then clearly do the work that aligns with what your clients need at that time. The challenge with that, with AI, is if the client has actually put together a very explicit brief on what they want, and then you have vague deliverables, the pushback is going to be, I'm not sure that what they're offering aligns with what you need. You may have directly addressed that in a conversation that was never documented where, and as a result, you're still going to get the pushback because you don't directly align with what they asked for in actual final proposal. So again, use the crit framework, identify where your gaps are, and then update these things, because you'll actually probably win more because you've more clearly aligned with actually how people are evaluating different vendors today. So that is my soapbox.
I love it. Those are great tips. Definitely make sure you grab his guide because he's got all of this broken down. So that's awesome. So once you've done all this work, you're improving your visibility, you're showing up in AI, you're using Mason's tips and tricks. Visibility alone is not the finish line. You can't just stop at lead gen. You have to be able to turn these leads from AI into customers. And that's going to happen through conversations. This is why conversations matter so much. 92% of customer interactions are still happening over the phone. So even as discovery is shifting to AI, the moment where these decisions are actually happening really hasn't changed. It's still happening in real conversations. And not all leads are created equal. Inbound calls tend to be your highest intent leads. So if you think about it, these people are ready to act. They have a need, they're looking for answers, and they're trying to make a decision in real time. Some studies show actually that calls convert at 10 to 15 times higher than inbound web leads. And it makes sense if you think about it, right? There's clear intent, there's consent to engage. It's one of the most efficient paths to conversion. You can answer questions, you can build that trust, and move them forward in that interaction. And calls aren't going anywhere. If you think about it, we're in a mobile first world. Calling often is the easiest next step. I mean, click to call is way faster than filling out that form, going back and forth over chat. And these aren't just leads, they're your best opportunities to convert. And this is really where it all starts to translate into revenue. So 78% of consumers say that they've actually chosen your competitor after failing to reach a business. So when you're missing that call, you're not just missing the lead, you're essentially handing that lead over to someone else. When you layer on top of that everything that we've talked about today, AI is driving more of these high intent leads. So if you're not there in the moment, they're not waiting, they're moving on to the next business. And this creates a pretty clear gap, between generating that demand and actually capturing it. Because even if your marketing is working, if you're not available when that lead is ready, you're essentially losing the lead that you've already paid for. AI voice assistants are built to close that gap. So think of this as you're always on frontline. They're answering every call. They're making sure nothing is slipping through, whether it's after hours, during peak volume. And this has, direct impact on your marketing performance. You're not wasting that spend on missed calls. You're actually able to turn that into something measurable. So ultimately that means, better outcomes, more conversions, lower cost per lead, a clearer understanding of what's actually, driving that revenue. The other aspect here that's important is the speed element. These AI voice assistants are pretty quick to launch. They're easy to customize, and it's fully connected to your tracking and attribution. And that ability to respond in real time is becoming even more important. We've actually built one at CallRail. It's Voice Assist. That's exactly what it was built to do, enabling you to capture these inbound leads 24/7. You're not missing these opportunities that your marketing is generating for you. And zooming out, this is how it all connects. It's not just about handling that conversation. It's about really tying these conversations back to your marketing. CallRail really helps you connect these dots so that you can power stronger, more effective marketing. We've been doing this for over 15 years, and we've just continued to build on that foundation. We've got AI in every plan. You can really see which campaigns are driving these qualified calls, which campaigns are converting, and how it ties directly into your results. So you get that clear picture. And that's how you move from guessing to, optimizing what's working. So if you're thinking about, how do I close that gap and really understand what's driving leads, we've got a QR code on the next slide, and you can try CallRail out for free and see how it works with your business.
Yeah, and then Scrappy ABM has got a bajillion resources on how to actually build out marketing programs. And I think more specifically, we've got a podcast. So if you want more stuff on just practical how to go make money, podcast is pretty good at that. Also, feel free to just shoot me an email or find me on LinkedIn. We do have a few questions. So do you want to hop over into questions really quick and then decide? No, I don't have a hard stop. So I don't know what we want to do from here. But I can be here all day. So Chris, I'm going to assume Chris. And if it's not, sorry, Christopher. But Chris, the consumer research journey has significantly changed with AI. How is this translating to sales cycles, and are consumers converting quicker? I can give my thoughts first, Danielle, and then if you want
Yeah,
to
this
add
is all
anything to it.
this is all you, Mason.
Cool.
This is definitely your expertise. Go for it.
Okay, so what we're seeing is, generally speaking, people are moving more quickly at kind of the mid-market and below, because they're actually able to make faster, more aligned decisions because they have a centralized, essentially, robot. And what it has helped do is make decision making far more data driven in nature. And again, it's this robot that's pulling all these reports and analysis and actually pulling it all together into a more objective pros and cons list. The challenge often with pros and cons list was like, okay, it was biased by the person that made it, versus with good prompting, which ideally your organization actually standardizing how you do prompting internally, prompting and then just feeding information. It then gives you more feedback. And then the conversation is not around how well did Sarah put together our pros and cons list for this, but it's, is there any missing gap or context within the context of the pros and cons list that we should address that nuances how we think? So in small organizations, actually, I see moving quicker. If they're utilizing AI in larger organizations, it's actually elongating the sales cycle because what's funny is access to more data is now creating more conversations internally. So when you have more and more stakeholders to align, it ends up creating more need for more meetings. And let me from that, the perceived need for more meetings because there's more access to more data. So we need to make a better decision and all that kind of stuff. So that's how I'm seeing it play out. So if you sell into the enterprise, it's actually making it a little bit longer. If you sell small business and mid-market, it goes a little bit faster. And then again, that's a vast generalization. Some people have analysis paralysis and access to more data will make them take longer regardless. So I just want to call that out. Not always the case, but generally speaking, that's what I'm seeing. Matthew, what are your thoughts on adding supplemental documents to the SOW/MSA process that informs the ultimate signer at a high level of the ultimate value being proposed? Yes, I would recommend doing that. Hypothetically, the challenge is I think that's standardly the sales deck. And what I have often found is that people don't look at the sales deck. They're like, oh, can you send that deck over? And we're like, yeah, for sure. And then like the champions like pour over it. And then the CFO's like, can you summarize in 2 sentences what this is? And then you're relying on your internal champion to be a professional at selling. And fun fact, they're not. And I say that politely, but they have only ever had a couple of conversations around your product or service. You've had hundreds, if not thousands of conversations around your product or service. So again, I like to create buyer enablement collateral that goes with it that is summarized down. So this is actually not crazy complicated. Fun other way to use AI is you feed in all the information based on all the calls and all the transcripts, and then you ask AI to actually put together a one-pager for you that is purpose-built for that CFO. So if you want to go that route and you want to have supplemental information, I think that's great. I also do recognize that executives move very quickly, so they may not even see it. So again, I want it to be in the actual thing that they're signing to the best of my ability because they may only upload that. So the more you can have in the thing they sign, the better. Now, obviously, there's legal ramifications for that, but also we're trying to be clear on what we're going to do for a customer. So I personally haven't had an issue with being more clear in our contracts. It just does create more things to be legally held accountable to. So, consults legal counsel. I'm just a marketer.
Aren't we all? We're just marketers.
Here, have a good time and sell some
Yeah.
stuff.
No, I think that's great. We work with, we have SOWs with folks, and it's helpful as like the individual. I loved what you called it, like the champion, but to be able to convey that value of like why we need this. So that's awesome. I love it.
Cool.
Well, I think those were all the questions that we had. If y'all have any more, definitely drop them in the comments. And like Mason mentioned, find us on LinkedIn, or we'll come back to this comment and respond. But thank you all for joining us, and
Yeah,
it's a wrap.
thanks everybody.
Thank you.